my name is Amanda Wakefield. I'm a resilience life coach and I live in a little country called Luxembourg, which is right in the middle of Europe. Um, I actually help people recover from toxic, unhealthy relationships that hopefully that they've gotten out of, they've realized the signs, but the lasting effects do go on forever. So my Instagram is life underscore in underscore my underscore colors with a U. I'm British. And my Facebook is Amanda Beyond Coaching. And also that is the name of my website.
Perfect. So, how did you get involved into assisting others? Like, what was the genesis of your story and why you got into this?
So yeah, I've been on a very long journey, um, starting from when I was a child. Um, and if we start with there, I was an orphan. So my mum died when I was 13 and she died of breast cancer. And this was back in the 80s in the north of England when cancer care was a little bit more brutal. It's still very brutal, but if you go back to the 80s, it was even more brutal. And so my mum and my father, I was a very wanted child. I was a second child. I was very wanted. And I was showered with love, with prospects, with confidence, everything really. Nevertheless, because my mum was absent for a lot of the time because she was in hospital, because we're going back to the 80s, you stayed in hospital for a long period of time. I was missing that particular aspect of parenting. And then, unfortunately, a few years later, my dad was involved in a car accident when I was 17 and he was killed. So, this sort of catapulted me into adulthood before I was ready. And they hadn't finished their job raising me to become an adult. So I had a lot of the foundations, but the finesse of been moving from teenager to adulthood just was completely missing. And I fell into a domestically violent relationship. I was craving love, I was craving affection, and I was craving a family, but I didn't know why. And again, this is, late 80s, early 90s, when therapy just didn't exist. And even now I reflect back and say, how could you leave a 13-year-old girl without a mum under such conditions with no therapy? It just didn't happen. Um, so going forward quite a few years, I did quite well in my career. And it was during that career that I saw people being treated so badly. Um, People I was coaching, I was they were they worked for me and they were treated badly by their partners, which affected their productivity at work, affected decision making skills, and it happened to me in the workplace as well. Having been in a domestic violence relationship is one thing, but if we then click over to narcissism as well, this doesn't happen to be just your emotional relationship. This could be any relationship, and I've seen it happen. It happened with me in the workplace as well. So fast forwarding many decades, I changed my career. I had a career coach, changed my career because of that, and here I am helping other people. And I
I
think I have
remember
a little bit of wisdom there.
no, I remember the first time someone shared a domestic violence situation that they were in. I think I was under 20. So this was like 15, 16 years ago. And the interesting thing about it is it didn't register to me at the time how bad it was until maybe after the conversation was over. And as I reflect on that situation, I began to realize how many people find themselves trapped in a domestic violence relationship for the reasons that you mentioned. There was something lacking inside me that I wanted. And it just so happened that Prince Charming comes along and presents that to me, or alternatively, you know, the Disney princess comes up and she's everything that I think I wanted in my life. They
Mm,
give me the attention, they give me the affection. They're saying things that I wish maybe my mother said, my
mhm.
father said, everyone around me said. When you found yourself in that situation, as you look back, Are you surprised that you went through it knowing the type of woman that you are?
Um, I give myself grace and I give everybody the grace as well. When you're in that situation, uh, you you don't walk into that situation. You don't, for if we go from the domestic violence within an emotional relationship, it wasn't on your first date that they leaned across the table and punched you or pulled your hair or spat at you or whatever. That didn't happen so early on. They showed you a mask that you believed, and your empathy believed it because that's what you wanted to believe, because you're an empathetic person. You have that inside of you. Nevertheless, as time goes by and they are isolating you or they blame you or all of the other little intricacies of abuse come inside, you didn't have the tools to recognize it. Therefore, when you look back, you go, why didn't I see that? Because you didn't have the tools at the time to recognize it. You were believing who they were. You believed that they were going to change. You believed it was never going to happen again. There's a plethora of reasons. So give yourself grace with hindsight that the person you were then is the person you are not now.
And that's what I love. At least that's what I learned. But then you have the alternative side, right? Where you have someone that goes from one domestic violence relationship to the next, to the next. And it's hard for them to pinpoint because what they would say, and these are the women that I work with, is there's a specific type of man or woman that I'm looking for. And it just so happens to be that person. But I think it's to your point where it's you're looking for something in these men or women that is missing inside you,
Absolutely.
right? And I
Absolutely.
think sometimes it's a hard conversation to ask yourself, why am I broken? Or why am I still broken despite me having the career, having the house, having the car? What do you think are some of the commonalities that keep people unaware of how bad their relationships are, even though hindsight is 2020, but while they're in it, they seem to have blurred vision, so to speak.
It's the carrot they dangle. I also, after that marriage, I went into another marriage and I went from domestic violence to narcissistic. And they have similar but very different traits. And um, I didn't realize I was going from a domestic abusive relationship to a narcissistic relationship. I had no clue whatsoever. I thought they were completely opposite types of people, but there's not. And once the mask slipped, there's very similar things underneath. Um, I I think that some of the commonalities, I wouldn't say that we were broken. The things we were looking for that weren't in ourselves. I say, as I said, I came from a totally loving family. There was nothing that was broken. It was just an unfinished job. Um, I I came from a religious family, and I believed that everybody was good. I believed nobody told lies. I was very naive in that respect. Perhaps there's some naivety in many of us, believing the other person is telling the truth. And it's also the dangling of the carrot. They are very good at saying, oh, well, this time next year, I will be doing this and you will be next to me doing this. And they paint a picture and you're like, oh, I'm really looking forward to that. And then mm, I know that they say that women have cycles. I believe men have cycles as well. And they can act good for a period of time. Then along comes the full moon and they're not so good anymore. Um, and then the mask slips again and you see something of that face. But because there's like a 3 or 4 weeks in between the episodes, if we say, you sort of get cajoled into it's going to be better because they have learnt from the previous episode, they've learnt their lesson how to not behave and they tweak it a little bit. So when it comes back, it's slightly different, it's not quite the same. And you've been painted this great picture in between. So you've gone on this fairground ride with them, like getting better. And then they do something not quite the same. It's not a repeating pattern. There's something similar, but it's something different at the same time.
It's like they push you just far enough before you break, then they bring you back.
Hmm.
Then they
Yeah.
push you again, right? Like let's say, for example, they push you 10 feet, then they bring you
Hmm.
back. Then they push you 12, then they bring you back. And
Yeah.
then 15. And it's kind of diabolical in a
Hmm.
way,
Hmm.
but there's like a method to their madness, right? Because they know how to find the people that they can do it. Because here's a funny thing: you don't ever hear a narcissist dating a narcissist, right? Or like an abusive person dating abusive. Because how would they look like? There'd be like chaos throughout the
It is.
household,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It quite often
Right?
does. I think.
It's like two bulls in one house, just running and destroying everything. But I do feel for a lot of the women who find themselves in this situation because women in general probably are more nurturing, more sympathetic, more empathetic.
Yeah.
Many times they want to feel like they can fix the person they're with,
Yeah.
right? Like, oh, he's not that bad. He just needs a little bit of, tape and a little bit of glue, and I can be the one that provides that, not realizing that they're damaging themselves in this way. And I wonder how many women fall into the trap when they're dealing with a narcissist or someone who's abusive to them, where they become codependent, where now they lose themselves, their identity, and they become not only, they go from, let's say, Amanda to, okay, I'm the abuser's wife, I'm the narcissist's wife. I am, you know, I'm not Amanda anymore. I'm not Terrain anymore. I'm a survivor, right? Even though that's a good thing, like you want to survive it, but are you Terrain the survivor or are you something else? Right? Like, talk to me about your state of mind as you came out of both of those situations and you wanted to not be that person anymore, but you wanted to be a better version of yourself, a version where you can identify the red flags or the yellow flags to ensure that you don't fall into that type of relationship again.
Mm. It's a long. Mm. It depends on how long you have been in these relationships and how bad they were. Um, I'm often, you often hear, do you think him hitting me or being violent to me is worse than him cheating on me? And I do have a little bit to say on that. It really, how far you're going to be pushed and where your edge is depends on a couple of things. What is your core values? And when they've breached your core values, if they breached your core values, it's going to be worse for you, depending on what your core values are. And what happens is when you talk about the state of mind, depending on how long this has gone on for, the more identity and the more of your core essence you lose because they are, as you said a moment ago, they push you 12 and then you come back, and they push you 12 and then you come back. That's because the narcissistic has to keep his muse close. So he's always going to bring you back, whether it's well, male or female. They have to keep you close. You're their muse, and they need you. They need to feed off your energy. They want to be, in some ways, they want to be you. They want to emulate you. They love that you're empathetic. They love that you're caring. They love that you have this big heart and that you can do things. They love that. So they want to keep it close. Um, so when you go through this, they denigrate you because they sort of like suck you up into them and they want to be that person for you. Um, and your state of mind is in a couple of things: mental chaos and emotional numbness. Um, from the chaos comes from one drama, you've hardly recovered, and you've got the next drama. You can't remember exactly what happened, and you're recovering, and the next one comes along. So that's the mental chaos. And the emotional numbness comes as a consequence of that because how can you how you feel about something if you haven't been given the time to recover from it? So it's the state of mind is mental chaos and emotional numbness all in one.
So, what would be some tips that you can recommend to help those that are currently in it trying to leave that type of relationship?
Mm-hmm. There's a couple of things you can do. Truly think about who you are before the relationship. Um, I can only encourage people to reach out to a friend or an online community. And even if you say, think to yourself, well, I know that, oh, we know as well in domestic violence and narcissistic relationships, they sort of isolate you from other people, and your friends go by the wayside, and your friends go, your family becomes a little bit more distant. Reach out to somebody and say, I'm struggling. What can I do? And a close family or friend, just because you've lost contact, isn't going to turn their back on you at all. On the contrary, they're going to do whatever they can to help you get out of that relationship. So, number one, reach out to a family member, an old friend, even if you've lost contact, or an online community. Point number one. Number two, analyze the situation that you're in. How dangerous is it? I was in some dangerous situations, and I had some grace within me to get some help. But analyze your situation of how serious it is, and that's going to tell you how quickly you're to get out of that relationship. And number three, without a shadow of a doubt, this person is not going to change. Do not believe it. They are not going to change. A narcissist doesn't have the empathy within them to recognize that they need some help. If you go to therapy, believe you me, they're there to blame you and to change you. There's no changing with them. There's no inkling that they want to change.
I wonder how much of that lack of change when it comes to narcissists or those who are abusive is because there's always a new batch of people to abuse. Right? It's like that joke where well, not that joke, I should say. It's like how every year there's a graduating class in school. Like every year
Mm-hmm.
there's high school, college, university graduates, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to, let's say, someone who's an abusive person or a narcissist, if they're abusive to me and I leave, there's always another person for them to abuse. Right. So I wonder how much of that plays a part in them not really changing, because a lot of times, if we look at it logically, sometimes a change can be forced, like something happened. Like I lost my job, so I'm forced to be this type of person. I've had failed relationships. I've identified why, so I'm forced, or I work to change this. But with a narcissist or someone who's abusive physically, mentally, verbally, if they're not abusing you, Amanda, or me, there's someone else that they can find to be abusive too because they're so charming, right?
Yes, they are very charming. And their love only, this is often as well, people say, after these relationships, how can they move on so quickly? It's taking me, many, many years to get over this. It's because your love was so deep, it was ingrained in you, it mattered to you. Does it really matter to them? Well, it matters that you're gone. They can move on so quickly to the next person and find somebody else to abuse in whatever way that is their way of abuse. So they just find somebody new very very easily, and they have quite often they're very charismatic. They can meet people very easily, and then they can also, sometimes their downfall is you can recognize the red flags. Anybody that talks about their ex-partner or their opposite sex of parenting, so for you, your mother, or for me, my father, if we talk badly about that relationship, it's a red flag. I mean, it may be valid. However, I'd have alarm bells to be ringing. Is this really valid, or is this person just in a, because hurt people hurt people. I always say this, and they are deeply hurting. They refuse to accept it.
One thing I want to add to that is I always counter it by asking the person, to your point, right? If they're going to talk so negatively about, let's say, their ex or something of that nature, I ask the question, okay, so if I were to ask the person you're talking about their views on you, what would they say? And all of a sudden they get quiet. I was like, aha,
That's
right?
a really
I
great
got
question.
you. Right? And what's interesting is that then I follow up with her and say that at some point things must have been good, at least for maybe not in reality, but maybe in the person's mind, because these two people were together for a period of time,
Yes.
right? So it could have been something along the lines as Amanda and I were together, and in my mind, things were good. In your mind, same thing. But on the outside, everyone's like, what the hell are these two together? Like they're abusive to each other. Do they even care about each other? But because we're so blinded by it, maybe by our own behaviors, our own trauma, whatever is causing it, we don't necessarily see it. And then when it eventually ends, if we're going to talk badly about each other, it's very telling of us because what some people don't understand, I think, is you choose your partner. So your partner at a point, your partner or every person you've been with is a reflection of you at that point in your life. So when someone told me one time that well these two guys that I dated they weren't any good and they're going on and on. I was like, how long were you together? Like, well, the first one was 4 years and the other I was like, I'm like, this is a long time. I'm like, so now I'm like, the person isn't good enough for you, or the person is this terrible person. I'm like, you do realize that it's a reflection on you because you ultimately chose to be with this person. Not saying that whatever trauma people go through is their fault, because it isn't. Right? No
No.
one should be abused. Everyone should be treated the same way you want to be treated. But there's many times where we have to be honest with ourselves and say, hey, you know what? To Amanda's point, hurt people, and we sometimes have to understand that we are maybe hurting in a way that puts us in some very difficult situations. Is that a difficult conversation to have, Amanda?
Definitely, yeah. I think it's very hard to do the inner work, because that requires you to be. I've recently said it in my one of my experiences. In order to learn, you need to do that inner work, and you want to learn to be trust and intimate, and trust and intimacy. It's not talking about trust and intimacy in other people. It's trust and intimacy in ourselves. And that intimacy is about being brutally honest with ourselves. And in order to learn that, you need to be quiet, you need to be calm, and you need to really sink into your feelings when they come up. And that is very raw for some people, to be able to accept that. But you can do it, and you can do it with people around you. You can, and just because there's a part of you that's unhealed, quite often when you peel back the layers, you go, oh, it's actually not as bad as I thought it was going to be. And I'm coaching people, and they go, I thought I was beyond help, and it's like, gosh, not at all. You're far from beyond help. It's on the contrary. Um, so quite often people are very scared to peel back those layers and have a deep look within themselves. But again, I think every new day is a new opportunity to learn, have a look, dig a little bit deeper into yourself, be a little bit more intimate with yourself, because the more intimate with yourself that you are, the balance is your trust in yourself grows, and therefore you can move forward and not repeat these patterns. But for some people, yeah, the initial steps is just a little bit too daunting, um, which I can totally understand. Because the narcissistic relationship is like myself. I went from the domestic violence to the narcissistic one. I was unhealed, and they gave me some comfort. As bad as it was, they gave me some comfort.
That's what I was going to ask you. Like, why do you think you ended up in those two relationships back to back, considering that they both are very potentially dangerous for the people that are in them?
I asked myself that question, but I know that their masks were very different. Um, they both wanted to impress me. They wanted to, which they did. Um, they wanted to pretend to be something that they weren't. They wanted to pretend, well, they did. They pretended they were somebody that they were not. Um, and they liked my view of life. They liked the way I saw things. So as much as they were very different, both of these people were attracted to me, and I am quite the same person as I was back then. I lost myself a little bit, um, and I think that's quite an important thing to say as well. I think we talked about it earlier. When we respond to things when we're in a traumatic situation, we're very rarely responding to it from our true inner self. We're responding to it from a place of lack, a place of fear, a place of unmet needs. So quite often when we are in these situations and we're responding to them, our fears come out and our lack comes out. But once we're healed, we can start responding with our true inner voice of like, seriously, you can't treat me like that. So move on. Next, I'll find somebody who can treat me better. But if you don't do the inner work in between the relationships, you will jump from one to the next. There's a similar trait, which is your outward view towards somebody is attracting this type of person, and you haven't got your checklist in order and to say, red flag, I'm not going to go there. Let's move. Let's go a little bit left or a little bit right and avoid that person.
And just so everyone knows, like when you end up in these situations, to Amanda's point, right? It's not like the first date, they come out and they say, okay, after dinner, dessert is a punch to the face.
Yes,
It's not
exactly.
something as direct as that. It's they identify something in you that they can exploit, that they can use to their advantage. And then what they do is they cultivate that.
Yes,
And then you get lured in. You're like, oh my God, he makes me feel good.
yes,
She knows me, right? I haven't felt this way before. And then before you even know it, full fledged in it. And that's how they will get you. One thing that seems to be common in both situations is the gaslighting piece. And I know that I shared that I love the quote that you have where it's choosing me over gaslighting. When I battled cancer, I faced another fight, the one against my narc ex. His gaslighting attempted to silence my voice, invalidate my fears, diminish my worth. And that worth one is so true. A lot of people who are in these situations feel their value decrease. Like, but when they've entered the relationship, the first couple of dates, they were built up to think that their value was so high. She likes me like this. He's treating me this way. They build you up and build you up, right? And you feel on top of the world. And then shortly after that, they start to tear you down. And then you begin to feel like you don't have any worth. But then you said, but in that pivotal moment, I made a life changing decision. I chose me. Describe that feeling and take us through how you were able to do that.
yeah. I thank you for bringing up that particular post. I write about this very often, and I think it's really, really, really important. Um, yes, I had cancer, and for him, it was, how can I say this? All the attention was on me, all my family and friends, all the attention that we had for everybody was on me. So all of our colleagues, um, it was all on me. Get Amanda better. Let's get Amanda right, etc. And he did not like that, and he told me to stop talking about it. And I was like, excuse me, I am going through something really serious here. And it was only that was probably I suffered a lot in that marriage and really tried to make it work because I was very determined not to have two, and I no longer say this, but two failed marriages or two marriages. Yeah, two failed marriages. And so I worked damn hard. And when I was working so hard on not letting this marriage fail, I worked hard on burying me. I worked hard on burying who I was. And when I got cancer, that was a wake up call that I sort of, the repetition came to mind. And I was like, he can't do it. Because he'd asked me not to talk about things before, like, don't talk about that person at work. Don't talk about this situation. Don't wear those bits of clothing. These unwritten, well, these rules that they have on you, they say it once and you know you're not to repeat it again. And this one, I was like, this is impossible. I need to talk about it. It's going to be life changing. I need to go to appointments. I need tests. The children need looking after. There was just this myriad of things that fell behind it. This just isn't possible. And I thought to myself, do you know what? I need his help in about 3 weeks' time with something. I'm not going to talk about it at all for 3 weeks, which was really hard to not talk about my feelings, to not talk about my fears, to not talk about children in all of this. I just didn't talk about it. And then, so 3 weeks later, I needed his help with an appointment. And he went mad at me. You're always talking about this. I've told you not to talk about it. And I was like, I haven't said anything for 3 weeks. Yes, you have. You mentioned it the other day. And I was like, oh no, don't. This isn't. And it was in the discussion that I was like, I am very clear and fluid with exactly what I'm saying. I'm very clear and fluid, knowing exactly what has happened in the last few days. Don't lie to me. Don't change the situation. This is not. And it all just went, it was like the oracle, all these conversations that I previously had. It was like, you've done this before to me. And I sucked it up and I went on with it. You've done this before to me, that you made me believe that you were correct and that I was somehow had a space in time that happened in my mind or something like that. No, I know exactly what was going on every single day, and you are lying to me now, and this is over. So, and in that moment, I was like, no, this is not going to happen anymore, and I'm out of it. And it was literally in that week, my love just went over, over.
You mentioned that you were burying yourself in that second marriage and that you were holding on to it. Was there some shame, maybe, or some hesitation because you didn't want to be known as someone that has had two failed marriages under your belt?
Yeah, but they not just. There's a couple of things to that. The shame of me being a successful career lady, having a narcissistic husband, didn't fit well. So I buried it to be able to keep up the facade for everybody. Um, and on the other side of things, they also tell you, well, nobody's going to want you. You know, you're going to be a single mom. You're at this age. You've had cancer. Who's going to want you? Nobody's going to want you. So you go, okay, yeah, maybe I'm a little meek person and I don't deserve to be loved because I've had 2 divorces and I've had cancer. No. So there's two things. Part of you, because society tells you, you know, you should be stronger and not be in this relationship. And then you've got the person that you're in the relationship with telling you, yeah, do be shameful and nobody's going to want you. So it's like you're squeezed in the middle of it. So no wonder you feel shame.
Yeah, it's interesting that people have this like view of when someone is in an abusive relationship. They think it's someone that is uneducated,
Mm-hmm.
that can't take care of themselves, that is in such need of
Yes.
someone besides them, but they don't realize that an abusive victim is in all shapes and forms. It could be the CEO at the job, it can be the barista at the coffee shop, it can be the sanitation worker, it could be the doctor, it could be the nurse, it could be the lawyer, it could be the police officer. It doesn't necessarily tie into the job that you have, but what you find is that some people who are maybe highly educated, highly successful, when they find themselves in these situations, they start to say, "How am I in this when I have this, this, and this?"
Yeah.
Right? Because maybe in their mind they have a stereotypical view of an abusive victim that doesn't match who they are.
Yes.
Would that be accurate?
Absolutely. I think that these types of relationships are they're classless, they're genderless, they don't it it comes in all shapes and sizes. And some people do believe that it's for the uneducated that fall into this trap. And it's on the contrary, it's not about education. Education from a formal perspective. It's got nothing to do with that. If we look at CEOs of major corporations around the world, I think we could quite easily say with the hands on our hearts, probably the majority of them are narcissistic. They are. So let's forget this about it being for the uneducated. It's not. It is for everybody. And it's just that society tells us, well, you must have a screw loose if you got there. You must have not been thinking straight. So therefore you have no education because you haven't thought straight. And that's where society clicks in, which is completely and utterly incorrect.
It's like the person who's doing the abusing, they're uneducated. They're, bottom of the earth, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And then the victims are even lower,
Yes, for being
right?
there. Yeah.
For being there. So it's interesting to see how society views them because it's like once you reach a certain social level, you're free of committing crimes. Right? Where
Yeah,
it's the opposite.
exactly. I think we could think of some people in major political positions that are case in point. It's and this is the shame of it, because it's the shame that we carry within us and that society puts on us. That's what stops you reaching out to somebody. That's what stops you reaching out to friends and family that you've been isolated from. Um, all of this it plays into their game. It plays into their hands. It makes sure that they keep you close. So society tells you don't reach out to your family and friends. You're going to look stupid, so you don't. Then the person with you is saying don't reach out to anybody. They isolate you on purpose so you don't reach out. And like you say, they give, and then they take it back very quickly and very easily. And it's a perpetual cycle that you're in, and you've never had time to recover from one drama to the next drama. And it's a different drama, but nevertheless, it is a drama. And they are so, I call my ex-husband a silver-tongued snake. He really was. The words that came out of his mouth, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But the actions behind those words were not so kind. But these relationships are very repetitive, very hurtful, and you seeing the red flags sometimes it's very subtle that they do it. It depends as well how many relationships they've had before, how they have got out of that relationship. So everybody is different, and it's yeah, recognizing the red flags, I think is crucial for anybody, either in the relationship or they're out of a relationship and they're looking to go into the next one. Sit down very often, be quite analytical with your lists and reflecting back, and take the time. I think you said as well, didn't go into too much detail on the love bombing, how they love bomb us. They shower you with, because in those conversations at the beginning, you share your likes and your loves and your cares, and they are going to think. And then in the next meeting, they've bought you something in relation to one of your things, or they've bought you a picture to say. So they're going to make you connect to them on the levels from the things you said at the beginning. And think to yourself, is this appropriate at this stage in dating? Is this really how it should be? And that's when some people say, oh, I've met my soulmate. We've only been dating for a month. Okay. Think about this. How did they know so much about you so quickly?
And everyone, do me a favor. Actually, know what? Do yourselves a favor, please. Make sure for those who are in these relationships that you are healed before you enter your next one. And here's why. You're going to bring your chaos to that next person who is innocent of the trauma that you've experienced. And what happens sometimes is knowingly and unknowingly, we start to treat that new person in a lot of ways how we were treated previously. And then we catch ourselves becoming similar to our own abuser unknowingly because our guard is up. We only know the abuse because the abuse becomes the normal. There hasn't been the factory reset, as I like to call it, where you've gone back to the person you were before that abuse. So do yourself a favor. Make sure you take the time to heal yourself before you enter into another relationship. Because if you're unhealed and you're still accustomed to that type of abusive or narcissistic behavior, you're going to bring that to the next person. And then you're going to overwhelm them in a lot of ways with traits that you didn't appreciate. And one of the tragedies I see that happen to people in relationships is once they're continue to date, or many times people just have sexual relationships after coming out of these, right? Is that they adopt traits of their abuser. And now when
Yeah.
they look in the mirror, they see their past as their own reflection.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts on that, Amanda?
Yeah. Um, many years ago, when I was going through therapy with my ex-husband, and it was very telling, and it was completely true. There are never two people having an argument. In that argument that that's going on, because the two of you, nevertheless, in the unhealed trauma, there's then 20 people in the room. So can you imagine how packed that room is? Because you've got your mum and your dad and your brother and your sister that you've had discussions with, maybe your siblings more. Well, for me, it was my siblings more than my parents. Um, then there were some school friends that you've had arguments with, and how you reacted to that person you're being triggered by. So all of a sudden, if you think, okay, I'm coming forward and I've got maybe 6 or 7 ghosts, not so good in my back, in my subconscious, and they're coming forward with also their numerous amount of people. This is a very small room for a lot of people to be in. Who's going to have the first word and who's going to say the most impactful? Well, so that's the way I try to unpack that when I talk about having some sort of talking help afterwards, to unpack the quantity of people that come forward through your mouth when you're having a discussion, and to know that when you're talking, it's coming from your authentic self. As for adopting traits from the abuser, I think so, because that's where you survive. And immediately after the relationship is over, you are in survival mode. So you do adopt quite a few of their traits to survive, whether you like it or not. And with some help from quite often your friends, you're going, seriously? Is that what you want to say? Oh, yeah, maybe that's not so good. um, you can change it because it's not you. You've just adopted it to survive. We all know this. Um, flight, fight, or freeze, and these actions are very true for us at many stages. If we're coming out of one of these relationships, many people fly away from relationships for a very long time, and many people are just frozen. And in that frozen moment, you do adopt some traits from other people, because we go back to the mental chaos and the emotional numbness. Well, what you're going to adopt is what you've seen happening.
So as we close, Amanda, what's some final last words you want to share with our audience today?
Oh gosh, every day is a new day. Every day is a new opportunity to learn something new. Every day is a new opportunity to be somebody new. Every day is an opportunity to start your recovery journey. And the healing journey is a lifelong journey. And the reason I say that, I don't want to put people off, is because we evolve. The person I was in my 20s is not the person I was in my 30s or my 40s, and now in my 50s, I'm a different person. So the healing journey changes, and your values will change. I think, now in my 50s, health is very important for me. It wasn't so important to me back in my 20s. So we evolve, and that is part of the healing journey as well. So have faith in yourself that you can heal, you can evolve, and life is fantastic if you give it the opportunity.